After about a year of preparation, the Collegiate Chess League finally launched on chess.com this past March with 58 teams from 42 schools, split up into 4 divisions, with teams in Division 1 having an average chess.com blitz rating of at least 2250, Division 2 teams having an average of at least 1900, and Division 3 teams having an average of at least 1550. Now, the way the league works is it's a double elimination system, which means that when you lose your first game, you're not automatically eliminated. You actually are sent into the loser's bracket for a chance to win that and then face the winner of the winner's bracket in the final. Now, each 4 players on a team would face off against the other 4 players in a match with 5 minutes and 2 seconds increment, and whichever team had the highest combined total at the end of the match would win. Now, if there was ever a tie, there would be a 3-minute, 0-second sudden death tiebreak, and if it was still tied, there would be a bullet tiebreak. My team, the Rutgers Scarlet Knights A team, was the 3rd ranked team in Division 3 with an average blitz rating of about 1850. Myself, I was the board 1 with a blitz rating of 21-22 going into the season, which put a lot of responsibility on me to lead the team into action. Now, in the first stage of the tournament, my team came up against the Florida State University A team with an average rating of about 1640. And after the first 3 rounds, we were actually trailing 6.5 to 5.5, meaning this last game was a must-win. I opened with e4, and he goes for knight of 6, the Alekhines defense. And I'll go for e5, attacking the knight, and the knight jumps into the center. And now pretty standard moves are something like d4 or knight f3, but I go for an aggressive c4, attacking the knight again. The knight comes back, and now a 3rd punch is thrown at the knight, forcing it once again back into the center. And again, I could go for something like d4, but I have a very aggressive line prepared against this opening, so I played bishop to c4, attacking the knight for a 3rd time. The knight is defended, and now knight to c3, meaning the black knight has been attacked for 4 moves straight. Now, if my opponent were to capture the knight, I would recapture, and after bishop takes, I would solidify this pawn structure and be ahead in development and already be starting out my attack. So instead, he decided to play pawn to d6, after which we traded, and then traded knights, and after bishop takes, pawn takes. Now 10 moves in, we traded some pieces, and my bishop is now in the center of the board, but it's attacked by the queen. So I brought my queen in, now defending the bishop, but also lining up an attack against this pawn, as well as this pawn. So it's kind of a trifold move. Now the best move here for my opponent would have been to play queen c7, defending these 2 pawns, after which I would bring my knight out, my opponent would bring his bishop out, and we would both castle and both be pretty much okay. Instead, after this move, my opponent played queen to e7 check, which does attack the king and defend these 2, but I was going to develop the knight anyway, and now the problem is his bishop is going to have a very hard time developing. If the queen is over here, it would have easy access to this square, but not anymore with the queen in the way. So he played g6, looking to develop the bishop this way, and I castled, and he brought the bishop out. But now that I'm castled and he's not yet, and his king and queen are in the center of the board, I saw this as a perfect opportunity to strike. So I played pawn to d4. Looks like an odd move because he can just capture me, and he did. And now I think a move that really caught him off guard, bishop g5, attacking his queen, but there's no one protecting my bishop, so he decided to just take it. But now here comes my queen, taking on f7 as his queen is no longer defending. And after king moves, I now grab his bishop. So although I sacrificed a pawn and a bishop, I now win them back on consecutive moves, and my opponent's king has been drawn out of his comfort zone. So my opponent plays rook to e8, protecting the rook, and now I come back and take on d4. And here my opponent played knight to d7, correctly not taking the knight, because then I would have bishop to f3, a discovery check to the king, and picking up the rook. And now again, I didn't defend the knight, but rather I played a sneaky little move, rook to d1, lining my rook and queen up with the king, and he now fell for the bait, taking the knight. But this was my idea the whole time. Bishop takes b7. So the idea is, if he were to take this bishop, I have a checkmate here, because the bishop is overloaded. And if he were to move his rook, then I could just take the bishop, and again I'm threatening checkmate. And his pieces are very uncoordinated. His king is just a sitting duck. So instead here, after bishop takes b7, he tried queen to f5, looking to defend this knight, but I just picked up his rook. And after bishop to a6, trying to maybe get some kind of attack going, I just brought the bishop back. And again, this knight has a ton of pressure on it. He tried bishop to b5, but you can't protect the knight through the bishop. I took the knight. After queen takes, rook takes, and king moves, I now pick up his bishop, and this is just a completely winning position now. After rook takes b2, rook e1 check, king to f8, I played bishop to c4, and after the rook moved, he resigned here. His only move being king to g8, and now the game would end with rook to e8 checkmate. And with this victory, we wrapped up a very clutch round 4 with the entire team winning, which means that we were able to defeat FSU with a score of 9.5 to 5.5, moving on to the quarterfinal of the Division III tournament. We now came up against the 11th seed, University of Southern California's B team, with an average rating of just under 1,700. And after winning the first 3 games, I got off to a pretty rough start in my game against their board 1, after the first 20 moves being down a pawn and down the exchange. But I'm playing against a slightly weaker player, so I feel like I always have a chance to maybe complicate things and come back. So I play here knight to c4, defending my pawn from his queen, and looking to maybe get it more active and start some kind of an attack. So he plays b5, and I jump in the knight further to d6. And he plays queen to e6, a smart move, bringing his queen back to attack my knight, so I now defend it with my bishop. And here he made his first significant mistake. What he could have done was just start pushing this pawn and try to promote to a queen, or maybe move the rook here to attack this knight. He moved his rook, but the incorrect rook, leaving this pawn undefended, and now I jumped in and took it with the knight. And now if he were to take with his queen, he would be giving it up and his king would be out in the open. But even this would actually be better than what he played in the game. Instead, he played a5, looking to push this pawn further, but now I came in with my queen, looking to attack here and already set up a mate threat. Now in the game of chess, when you're beating someone and you feel like you're playing well, a lot of times you'll start to kind of take your foot off the gas, relax a little bit, and I feel like this is exactly what happened to my opponent. He was thinking he could just sit back, maybe push this pawn, make a queen, and just kind of eventually win. But he didn't realize that I was already starting to assemble a pretty strong attack. What he should have done was take this pawn, because it makes the queen a lot more active, and he would be able to stop my threat here. Instead, he played a4, and I played knight to g5, and he actually resigned here because I have an unstoppable mate threat against h7, and I'm also attacking the queen. So there's really nothing he could do. If he were to play h6, I would simply take his queen, and now it's me who is completely winning. I have too much material for him to be able to stop my attack. So if he had just played queen takes e4 here, after knight to g5, he would have had this amazing defensive resource, queen to h4, now protecting the pawn, meaning that if I were to take the pawn, he could recapture with the queen. So after this comeback victory, we were able to secure this round 10.5 to 5.5, progressing on to the semifinal of the winner bracket. So in the semifinals of the winner's bracket, we now came up against our toughest competition yet, the second-ranked Arizona State University A team. And they actually had a very strong team, with their first 3 boards all being in the 21 to 2200 range. And this game I was playing against their 3rd board. So after 23 moves, we reached this position where clearly I have a space advantage and I'm on the front foot, but we traded off a lot of pieces, so it's very difficult to see how to attack here. So I actually decided to play knight to f6, looking to attack him and also maybe bring the rook in and create some kind of a mate threat. So he backed up with his bishop, looking to trade off rooks, and I went here, threatening mate. Now his best move would have been to just take the knight, and after a pawn trade, it would be very equal here. Instead, he played bishop to c5, looking to maneuver his bishop to attack my king. But after this rook check and the king moving to e7, we trade rooks, and now although I can take this pawn immediately, I didn't take it right away because he would then have this bishop check, and after the king moves, he would take this pawn, and my entire pawn chain would crumble. So I decided to be patient and just move the king in, and now he moved his king here. But now, rather than winning this pawn, I have a way to win this pawn with a fork. Knight to g8, attacking his king, and also attacking the pawn on h6. And after king to f8, I took, and he moved his bishop in, and now I grabbed another pawn. And here he had a trap laid for me that looked like it was going to win my knight, as he moved his bishop here, and if my knight were to just simply retreat, he could pick up my bishop. So although I had less than a minute left here, it took me only 9 seconds to find the game-saving move that allows me to not lose a piece with knight to d8. although the bishop can be taken, and he did take it, now knight takes e6, and it's a fork between the king and the bishop, and I'm also picking up another pawn in the process. And after the dust has settled, we can see that I have a 3-pawn advantage, and this is now pretty easily converted to a victory. I'm going to speed up the game for you here as I just maneuver my king and my pawns forward, give up a pawn, but eventually we're going to win it back, and the pawns are just going to march up and up the board. And eventually, after 55 moves or so, I finally am able to promote to a queen. And although I actually missed the mate and won here with queen to f8, I played queen to f7 instead, and after king to h8, queen to h7 checkmate. So this was a pretty good victory, and I was also able to win my next game against their board 2, but unfortunately I lost in a tough game against their board 1, meaning we lost the match overall 9-7 and got demoted to the losers bracket. So now we're into the semifinal of the losers bracket, and we come up against FSU once again, who after losing to us in the first round have done very well and managed to win their last 3 matches. And here we have my game against their board 3, who actually managed to hold me to a draw when we had played previously. And after 20 moves, I'm down a pawn here, and I'm trying to find a way to break through and create a deadly attack. So I move my queen back, not looking to trade yet, and he jumps in with his knight, attacking my rook, which looks good, but I just bring my rook forward and his knight has to retreat. And now I push my pawn forward, looking to create some threats that he may not be able to see. He plays e5, and this is exactly what I was anticipating. I now take his knight, and here he could have taken the knight, but he decided to take the bishop, setting up a pretty crazy tactic here. I played knight to f5, allowing his rook to capture my queen, but I'm also attacking his queen and looking to jump into this square. If he would be to take my knight, I would simply grab his rook, and after this, he would actually still be okay. But he decided to play rook takes queen. The knight stealthily infiltrates his camp. His king moves out of the way. And now I recapture his rook, meaning that his only move is to block with the queen. So rook takes queen and king takes. And at the end, I'm able to win my pawn back. And here, actually, with a move like bishop to e6, just getting it out the way, this would have been a very equal position. And although I like my chances against somewhat of a weaker player, and I also had more time on the clock, now, unfortunately for my opponent, he had less than 15 seconds on the clock, and under some time pressure, he forgot that his bishop was under attack and actually just moved his king, allowing me to take. And this loss of just one piece is enough to swing the game completely in my favor. He tries to bring his rook back into the game. I take another pawn, and here it's pretty much a smooth path to victory. I actually gave up my rook and knight just to simplify everything, but I have just way too many pawns. And pretty similarly to the last game, they're just going to move up the board, and here on move 45, he resigned, as either I'm going to promote this pawn to a queen or this pawn to a queen, and it's just going to be a checkmate from there. So with that victory, we were able to once again defeat FSU, this time with a score of 9.5 to 6.5, moving us on to the final of their losers bracket. We now face the MIT B team, who impressively had made it all this way despite being the 13th seed going into the tournament. And I won my first 3 games against their lower boards and now face their board 1. And after 9 moves, we have a very typical position in the Richter-Rauser variation of the Sicilian, in which my opponent has just played knight to c6, completing his development. And now, rather than making a solid move like king to b1 or maybe bishop to e2, I decide to play a very aggressive move, g4, offering my pawn to his knight, and he actually took it, which is not such a smart thing to do because it now opens up the g file for my rook. And after bishop takes, queen takes, rook to g1, his knight is now under attack, and he's going to have to move it back eventually. So he played knight to f6, allowing me to recapture his pawn on g7. And now we can see that he may have wanted to castle short, but he no longer has the opportunity to because his defenses have just been penetrated. So he could have just castled long here, which would be perfectly fine. And then I would just probably continue my development, maybe move this bishop out, try to maneuver my rook onto this side of the board. Instead, he played king to f8, attacking the rook, which I just brought back to g3. And now he brought his rook into this side of the board, lining it up with my queen. But already, with his king being kind of vulnerable, I was thinking on how to cook up an attack here. So I captured his knight on c6, and he recaptured the bishop. And now I was already realizing that if I could just get my queen to this side of the board and attack his king, that could end up being a very deadly attack. So I actually played e5 here, and he actually can't capture my pawn because then I simply take his rook, and I have some backup for my queen. So he just retreated his knight to e8, thinking he'd be safe, and now f5. Again pushing a pawn forward and now opening up a square for the queen. If he were to make a slow move like d5, then here comes queen to h6 check, and this is almost checkmate. He would have to give up his knight. I would take his rook, and be completely winning. So he saw this and played h6. Now the rook protects his pawn, and I can't infiltrate with my queen. So instead I played f6, another pawn move, pushing forward again. Now this pawn is attacking his queen, and also a square close to his king. So he moves his queen out the way, and now I played my rook to d3, now creating a standoff along the d-file. These pawns are the only thing stopping these rooks and queens from blowing each other apart. So he played d5, looking to kind of shore up his defenses, and maybe he'll be able to remaneuver his knight and bring his king to safety. So now that there's no longer action on the d-file, I'm looking to swing my pieces back over to the king side. So I played bishop to h3, clearing some space for my rook. He played knight to c7, and now the rook gets into position, already lining up on the g-file. And if he's not careful, this could be deadly. And I don't think my opponent really sensed the danger here, because he just played knight to b5, allowing me to bring another rook into the game. And now I have two pieces on the g-file. And I'm already threatening something very serious, which is pretty much unstoppable here. And my opponent here, oblivious to the danger that he was in, captured my knight. And now, rather than just recapturing this knight, I have a way to finish the game in style with the move. Queen takes h6 check. Now he has only two options. He can either take the queen or move the king. More logical, of course, is to take the queen. But now, because of my rook battery and my pawn here guarding this very important escape square, I'm able to bring the rook in and deliver checkmate. So this was another good victory, allowing me to finish the round with a score of 4-0. But overall, at the end of the match, the score was actually 8-8, meaning we had to go into a tiebreak. Now, in the 3-minute sudden death tiebreak, I actually played the same player, and we played a very similar opening. And I was able to win here after a crazy exchange at the very end of the game where I had a slightly more time. And I actually had a couple seconds on the clock left when we traded off the knights, and I have a pawn that's about to promote, but he actually lost on time here. However, unfortunately, the rest of my team were not able to win their games, meaning we lost the match 3-1 on tiebreaks, after which MIT went on to the final of the whole Division III tournament and lost to ASU, who we had lost to in the third round. So overall, the Rutgers Scarlet Knights finished in 4th place in Division III, which I think for our first time in our first tournament like this was pretty good. Myself, over the 20 games that we had over 5 rounds, I was able to win 17 of them, lose 2, and draw 1, with my only losses coming against ASU's board 1 and FSU's board 1 in our second match against them. So overall, I think I performed pretty well throughout the tournament. Unfortunately, we were unable to win. But I think for the inaugural season of the Collegiate Chess League, this was a pretty well-run event. And I'm definitely looking forward to see if they're going to have it again next year, as I would really like to participate again, whether it be as a player or as a coach. So I hope you enjoyed the highlights, and stay tuned for more chess action on the channel.